The next couple lines were pretty amazing and talks a little bit about self-belief, because the next line was, you are the school record holder in the mile and the 2 mile. You are a high school All-American. You are being recruited by colleges across the land. You will someday run in the Olympic Games. Those lines in that letter that I'd written to myself, I had written as a 7th grader, 540 miler, who wasn't even the best guy on the junior high team. And so when I look back at that and I think of that, and even as a senior looking at that, I thought, wow, what a naive little 7th grader I was to believe that that was going to happen over the next 5 or 6 years.
Ladies and gentlemen, the day is here. If you're watching this, I have a smile on my face because this is a conversation I've wanted to have for, quite frankly, many, many years, because it's a conversation with someone who, if you are a follower or fan of the sport, you know his name, Coach Ed Eyestone. Coach Eyestone has been successful at every level, from an athlete himself, where he was an 8-time member of the U.S. cross country national team, a 5-time U.S. road runner of the year as a professional runner, a Olympic marathon athlete in 1988, where he placed 29th, and then again in 1992 in Barcelona, Spain, where he placed 13th. All the way back in high school, he won a state championship, and then in college at BYU, he was one of 4 men to claim the collegiate triple crown, which consists of cross country, the 5K, and 10K titles. What he's probably better known for, at least in terms of our generation, is his coaching, where he's the current head coach of BYU, and he's been coaching there for over 20 plus years, where he's had remarkable success. He's won 2 team titles on the men's side, and he's produced remarkable athletes. I mean, the list goes on, but they include Jared Ward, Casey Klinger, Connor Mans, Clayton Young, Kenneth Rooks, James Corgan. I mean, he's coached so many incredible athletes throughout the years to such massive success. And I think a lot of people know about his success as a coach, and that was definitely a route that I was interested in. But I thought, if I have 60 minutes with this guy, I kind of want to hear about things that I don't know about and other people don't know about, which is a lot of his background. So I actually love this conversation and the angle I took, which was very much one of diving into his backstory, how he got his start in the sport of running, his years growing up, his relationship with his parents, how that formed now a lot of his coaching principles, his early years at BYU as an athlete, so many of the different, I think, like unheard of stories of Coach Ed Eyestone that make Coach Eyestone who he is today. I love this conversation. This was, quite frankly, one of my favorite podcasts I've ever done, and I don't say that lightly. I really rarely say that if you listen to the podcast regularly, so I'm not just saying that to say that. And I think you're going to find a lot of value from this one, as well as it just feels like you're sitting around a campfire at night hearing stories from a legend in the sport, and there's really no better way to put it than that. Full of stories, full of wisdom is Coach Ed Eyestone. I was truly blessed by this one and think you guys are going to absolutely love it. If you guys do love it, or you have been enjoying the podcast in the past, we've got a big 2025 on tap. So you'd be a fool not to hit the follow or subscribe button if you have not already done so you never miss another episode. And then if you enjoy this episode in particular, consider sharing it with a friend. Over 50% of people discover their favorite podcasts through the recommendation of a friend. So there are people out there who the Running Effect podcast is their favorite podcast. They just don't know it yet. So be that person that introduces it to them. And also, last favor to ask of you is give us a follow and a 5-star review. It takes 5 seconds of your time and impacts the show greatly. With those words aside, I hope you all enjoy this conversation with truly the man, the myth, the legend, Coach Ed Eyestone. Coach Ed Eyestone, welcome to the Running Effect podcast. How are you doing this morning?
Hey, I'm doing great. We just finished up a workout. School hasn't started yet here at BYU. It starts tomorrow. So it's always, big question mark, that first workout back, when we've had guys going home for 2 or 3 weeks. And I can confidently say that they haven't just been sitting around for the last 3 weeks. They're looking pretty good. And that's not always the case. So, sometimes it's like, oh, I can tell you haven't run and you're 10 pounds heavier than you were before you left. You've been enjoying all that good chocolate and whatnot, mom's home cooking. But I think by and large, the guys did the work that they were supposed to do over the break. And indoor season is so very short that you got to come back pretty fit if you're going to have any impact at all. So good workout.
Awesome. We're going to get into your coaching and principles and all of that in this conversation. Of course, you're wearing the national champions hat. You've done that a couple of times now in your career. And I think a lot of people know about that side of you and your success within BYU, which we'll definitely get to. But when I think about having a conversation with you, I think about wanting to talk about some of the things that people don't know about. And people know about, your marathon career, your success at BYU as a student athlete. And again, we'll touch on those things in this conversation. But one of the interesting facts I came across was that you were cut from your high school baseball team. Take me back to those days, and what was that day like when you were cut?
Yeah, I mean that's probably something that's familiar with many young men and women, and one reason why they maybe push them into track and field to begin with. But yeah, I mean it's the tale as old as time. As a person who wants to be very good at football, or in my case, baseball, or others basketball, and I just didn't have. I actually enjoyed it. I grew up in the '70s, right? So that's when I was playing little league and doing that. I think baseball was even more relevant then than it is now, and it probably wasn't that uncommon for someone in my demographic to be focusing on baseball, wanting to play professional baseball and do all those things. And I thought I was doing well enough that I was on some of the all-star teams in little league, but then as I got into junior high, and we had a 3-year junior high, seventh, eighth, and ninth. As a seventh grader, tried out for the team. Felt like that would just be another step towards my professional baseball career. Once you get into junior high and high school, then you actually have to try out for the team. And then getting cut from that baseball team was fairly traumatic for a young seventh grader. But it really allowed me then to pursue the sport that's kind of become my life, which is track and field. Because in the spring of the year, as we know, that's when track and field gets going, and I realized, well, if I can't play baseball, maybe I can investigate this running sort of thing. And it was kind of should have been a no brainer, because my dad was actually a pretty accomplished runner, relatively speaking. Again, he was from that greatest generation of young men who grew up during the Depression, and then the Dust Bowl, and then uh, but then running in high school, he was good enough to get a scholarship to the University of Idaho in Moscow, Idaho. And but his freshman year was 1941, so his running career was kind of derailed by a thing called Pearl Harbor and the World War II. And by the time he came back, he still ran for the college team, and enjoyed that. So I had heard of his running stories, and running cross country and whatnot, but I hadn't really even listened to him or paid much account until I did get cut from the baseball team. And I was like, okay, Dad, tell me more about this track stuff, and what do you think I could be good at, and what do you remember from it? So it ended up being a really good thing for a father and son to kind of bond over at that point in time. And I think he was, he was happy to be able to support me, and obviously was, as I progressed and got better, he was one of my more enthusiastic fans.
Early on in those running days of picking up the sport and running track for the first time, was there a particular like practice or workout or race that it really clicked in your head of, oh shoot, okay, maybe there's some talent here that wasn't apparent on the baseball diamond?
Um, Junior high, I don't know that I was anything remarkable. I was better than my cohorts, the guys my own age in the seventh grade and eighth grade, and as a ninth grader, I was the fastest guy in our junior high. I think I ran about 5:04, and got the school record as a ninth grader. But 5:04 these days as a ninth grader, that won't even get you on the varsity team for a lot of places. So. But I was, relatively speaking, doing well, and all along felt and had a self belief that, yeah, good things were going to happen. Interestingly enough, and I've told this story as kind of a motivational thing, but I'll give you a very small snippet of it, summary of it. I had a class as a seventh grader that was called Success. It's basically the class that you have in junior high as kids transition from elementary school, to help them realize, just because there are guys walking around the junior high that are a foot and a half taller than you, you ultimately will grow. You'll go through maturation. You'll set goals. Things are going to work out okay for you, you lowly little seventh grader. And I had this class the second semester of, and one of the projects that we did is we wrote letters to ourselves that we were going to, put in some time capsule and then open up as seniors in high school. And so I wrote this letter to myself and sealed it up and just, it was the assignment of the day, right? So you forget about the assignment of the day. Well, 6 years passed from the time I was seventh grader to a senior in high school. And at the time I was, as a seventh grader, I had started running. So, and I was enjoying running, but my PR was probably 5:40 or something in the mile. As seventh grade, that's not bad. Um, but then as a senior in high school, I opened up this letter that I'd written essentially 6 years before, and it basically said, "Dear Eddie," um, because I was known as Eddie up until I was in high school, probably. And it said, "Dear Eddie, you are now a senior in high school, unless you've dropped out. Ha ha ha." And so I was going, okay, that was interesting. As a senior, I'm looking back and, oh, what a little smart aleck I was. And then it said, you are 6'2", 180 pounds. Well, because as a seventh grader, you feel like you want to be the same stature and weight as your father, right? And he was about that. And I think by the time I was a senior, I was probably had just broken 6 foot, probably. So I was kind of tall, but I was maybe all of 135, 140 pounds. So very tall and gangly. So I was going, well, okay, I wasn't, it wasn't a great prophet in terms of predicting how much I was going to weigh. But uh, but then the next couple lines were pretty amazing and talks a little bit about self-belief, because the next line was, you are the school record holder in the mile and the 2 mile. You are a high school All-American. You are being recruited by colleges across the land. You will someday run in the Olympic Games. Those lines in that letter that I'd written to myself, I had written as a seventh grader, 540 miler, who wasn't even the best guy on the junior high team. And so when I look back at that and I think of that, and even as a senior looking at that, I thought, wow, what a naive little seventh grader I was to believe that that was going to happen over the next 5 or 6 years. Um, and even had I written that as senior in high school with PRs of about 9:12, which was pretty good time back in the day for 3,200, and about a 4:11, I think 4:12. Um, Even looking back at, had I written it then, that would have been pretty naive to think I was going to go on and be a college All-American and an Olympian, and etc. So but I think it speaks a lot about the importance of that belief. Wherever you're at in the process, you believe that the hard work, determination, everything that you're doing is ultimately going to pay off and pay some dividends. So that was good. Obviously, as a seventh, eighth, and ninth grader, I was doing what you do as a seventh, eighth, and ninth grader, and that's only running starting in March probably, and through the end of May. And a lot of those workouts entailed running down to the Weber River and skipping stones in the river and then running back. So things didn't get really serious, but I did have, and the thing that probably elevated me to a position where some of those things in that letter could happen was when I went to the high school. I had one of these coaches who had run in college. He knew about the culture of running. He introduced us to Track and Field News, which was pretty much the only, this is obviously pre-internet days in the late 70s. Introduced us to Track and Field News, where you could get information around the country of great, what was happening on the national scope and at the high school level as well. And you could bet that at the first of the month would run to the school library and try to be the first one to get the Track and Field News and see what the fastest high school guys were running, because that's how you kind of found out. And so I think all of those things, and he introduced us to things like running through the summer and having that whatever 200-mile t-shirt or whatever that he got over the summertime, and so I was very fortunate to go into a system of someone who had been there, had run at the college level, and just introduced us to the whole culture. And he was not shy in terms of us starting to do double workouts as as a sophomore in high school. We were doing morning runs and whatnot. Had a strength and conditioning class first period of the day, and he'd like you to take that class so that you could essentially do your morning run then, and then you could do the afternoon workout. So I was fortunate to have some great mentors and great coaches early on, and I think that's what kind of set my path.
Amazing stories. Oh, so I appreciate you sharing those. Those are some of the best ones I've heard. One question in regards to the letter. So you read it in seventh grade, you open it senior year of high school. And as you said, kind of naive, smart aleck at the time in seventh grade, but you read it as a senior. And as you mentioned to me, 9'12" guy, 4'11" guy, and coming from a 540 miler, going back to that seventh grade version, I would imagine it instilled a level of, oh shoot, maybe the seventh grader didn't quite know what he was talking about, but I kind of am on the trajectory that this kid is speaking about. And you mentioned the Olympics in that letter. You obviously make your first Olympic team, if I'm not mistaken, in 1988 in South Korea. And you were still a while away from that as a senior in high school. But what was
Sure.
your thought process when you read that letter in terms of, oh, okay, maybe this Olympic dream isn't crazy. Like maybe the
Yeah,
seventh grader
no,
was onto
no.
something.
I thought actually it was. I thought it was being very optimistic at the time as a seventh grader. I mean, I was amazed at how many of those things had happened. I was the state champion. I was the school record holder in two events. And so, and yeah, no, I hadn't had, and I didn't even realize even as a high schooler, what still entailed in terms of making Olympic teams and whatnot. But I think that gave me continued motivation and hope. And so I think that was a really nice thing. And I was at the time when I opened that letter, I was probably still considering colleges, universities, and again, this was pre-internet days, so um, I wasn't recruited. I mean, I was recruited by the schools in the West and in the Intermountain area, but I think the letter that I got from furthest east was maybe Kansas, which actually was pretty good on their part that they would recognize that I was running pretty well there in Utah, but really when it came down to it, once BYU made the offer, which they were very late in doing so, I think it was as late as May of my senior year, and I still hadn't made a commitment, but at the time. Uh, what I knew about BYU, I didn't really realize how good they were. That they had produced Henry Marsh, Paul Cummings, Doug Padilla. They'd had a number of Olympians, and but I wasn't really aware or plugged into that as you usually aren't in high school. But I did know they had a very good football team at the time, and they had a really good basketball team at the time, and they got a lot of coverage and play in the state. And I thought, well, okay, these guys are at a different level athletically, their athletic department. So maybe, the track team is going to be at a higher level as well. And so I kind of went into it more so off of that, not knowing the good tradition that they had, but then finding that out that, I mean, Lassie Viren, for heaven's sakes, had been at BYU for a couple semesters. And Lassie Viren, I did know because I had, became a fan of watching track and field, and as a young 10 or 11-year-old had watched him win in both Munich and in Montreal. And so yeah, it was just by sheer dumb luck, really, that I ended up at BYU, and then had a teammate by the name of Doug Padilla, who was on a trajectory that would take him to the Olympic Games, and then guys like Paul Cummings, who also would ultimately be on Olympic teams, and Henry Marsh had already made a couple of Olympic teams by that point, and those guys were all alum. Other than Doug was an actual teammate, and so seeing guys that were actually getting it done also, and were then graduating and running on this new, that was back in the time when amateurism, the rules were getting a little gray, and guys were actually able to kind of start making money and be open about it, or having to steer your money through trust funds, but you could still make a go out of it. So all of those things impacted me, but it was, pure dumb luck that I ended up here, and then had the coaches and the teammates that were doing great things.
In my conversations with many of your athletes over the years, whether it's Clayton or Connor or James or Kenneth, or Creed, like you name the athlete, one of my favorite components of those conversations as someone who's into their faith is them openly speaking about their faith and how it impacts their running, how it impacts their life. For you, can you speak on that in your own personal journey when you feel like you first accepted your faith and how it influences your life, your running, and specifically your coaching today? Because I know these young men who I get to talk to, they're influenced by you and your witness to it. So could you speak about where that started for you, when you bought into it, and how it influences you present day?
Yeah, well, obviously, growing up in Utah, and our culture obviously is one that's the majority, particularly when I was growing up, people living in Utah were members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, otherwise known as Mormon. And my parents my mom had grown up in Idaho as a member of the church. My father, when he started dating my mother just post World War II, up at the University of Idaho, he quickly learned that, okay, here was a gal that, if he pulled out a pack of cigarettes, she didn't think that was as suave and debonair as he thought it was. And she quickly said, if we're going to date, I really don't want, one of these, burning tobacco sticks hanging out of your mouth. So, and he said, okay, crumpled it up and said, okay, that's the last one you'll see from me for a while. So, thank goodness for mom. And we sometimes call that flirt to convert. And Old Virginia Geddes did a very good job of flirting with this returned paratrooper from World War II. And before long, they were wed, and a year or two later, he converted to the faith, and he ultimately ended up being the one that was kind of, if you look at the scale of orthodoxy, he was probably ended up being the more orthodox of the two throughout their lives. But they raised us. Mom and dad just raised us in an environment where it was important to go to church. It was important to have a belief in a higher power. It was important that you follow the tenets of your faith. And so I grew up in that environment, and it was an environment that worked for us and as a family, and as I uh, grew and matured and whatever, I felt like it gave me peace, gave me comfort. It helped kind of center me as an individual as well. And so it was not difficult for me to um, adopt those same principles, and growing up in a faith. It was and you're with your family and your community surrounded in that, it becomes a very comfortable thing, and it's a good thing for your community as well as yourself. And I always felt like having a higher power involved. When you get down to it, I think at the end of the day that the higher power, God, if we want to call it that, is not going to really give a darn about your religious preference. What I should say is it should not care about these small little insignificant things like like the high school state championship race or the NCAA championships. In the grand scheme of things, there's poverty, there's war, there's people in need, there's so much suffering in the world that's where the time and concern of a higher power should exist. But I have found that there is in having a belief in a God, that there is a sense of comfort that comes just knowing that you are loved, that you are that your concerns can be concerns of a higher power as well. And I don't know that I've ever felt like going into a race, okay, I'm going to win this race because of my particular faith, but I have gone into races and feeling like, you know what, things are going to be okay. I've got things in perspective here. I've got a family that loves me. I've got a God that loves me. I got and win, place, or show. I'm gonna feel good, and I'm gonna do the very best that I can. And part of that, doing the very best or running to my potential, is the fact that I'm centered, I'm grounded. I have a belief system that allows me to believe that I can receive comfort from from a higher power. And I think that's what people of faith ultimately are going to tell you across the board. It's not unusual to have both teams praying prior to a game, and it's not like, oh, whoever gives the best prayer, that team's going to win. But I think all those that are believers find comfort, find relief, and find example in their belief system, and that certainly describes my faith.
You described extensively a little bit in this conversation your relationship with your parents, the stories growing up with them, your dad being a runner before 1941. You mentioned how he met your mom there and being a paratrooper in the war. How do you feel like they formed you as a person? And looking back now as a very successful coach, what are some of the key tenets and components that you feel like they instilled in you that have made you a good coach now?
Yeah, well, just as a parent, um, I think the example that I got from them is just be supportive of your kids and don't try to live vicariously through what they do. And I've tried to do that. I feel like all of my siblings kind of learned that as well. What we knew was we were going to be loved. It was uh, without no strings attached. Okay. That my parents' love for me wasn't going to be based on, how much I won the state meet by, or if I made the Olympic team or not. They were there as supporters, and they were certainly, my mother was my biggest, PR person could be. It was embarrassing, to meet complete strangers, and then she would go on about all the great things that you'd done, and it was like, ah, shucks, mom, and fortunately, I think most of us have parent, if we're coming from a good place, we have parents like that, and I think I wish as a high schooler I would have appreciated that more, and rather than trying to shush my mom every time she blathered on, and just realize that that's a parent's job. Parent's job is to embarrass their child by being too effusive and too loving. And the fact of the matter is, when you have parents like that, then it allows you to dare to go after, whatever these big goals that you've set for yourself, because you know that in the end of the day, you're not going to be considered a failure, at least by your parents. And so it gives you a sense of self and a sense of confidence. And I think that, some of those same traits, if you're a successful coach, and kind of let your athletes know that your love for them and your support for them is not based on their performance. And certainly sometimes it's a lot easier if they're having great races to be, really excited. But that there should be no, there's you should always be feeling positive about the athletes that you're working with, and certainly my parents were great examples of that.
I mentioned earlier on in this conversation that a lot of people would be familiar with your, individual accolades, but for those who aren't familiar, you were 8-time member of the U.S. cross country national team, 5-time U.S. Roadrunner of the Year as a professional runner. You attended BYU and received a bachelor's in psychology and minor in Spanish and master's degree. You ran a PR of 13:32 in the 5K, 27:41 in the 10K, which was a 10K record at the time, and 2:10:59 in the marathon. You made the Olympic team in 1988, where you placed 29th. Then again in 1992, where you placed 13th. You were quite the guy. Quite the guy. You were one of 4 men to claim the collegiate triple crown 5K, cross country 10K. Like, I could go on, right? I just listed a bunch of accolades. I probably give you glimmers of your mom back in the day when she was
Yeah,
bragging
no, that's
to
good.
the friends. So my question here is, how much of your current coaching do you take from your personal experiences as an athlete? Because a lot of the best coaches who I've talked to on the podcast, Mike Smith, Coach Milt, Carlson, like, they were all good athletes, and they can talk about their, experiences in college, but it really never went much past college. Whereas, he made the Olympics twice. He did things that I feel like haven't been done in the NCAA coaching realm before. So how much do you draw from those experiences?
Well, that's I don't know, good question. I mean, one of the differences obviously is I was involved at it as an athlete for a long time. I was doing it from, and I was running well enough. As a freshman, I made my first U.S. team. It was a junior world cross meet in Paris, which was a great eye-opening experience for me. Traveling on that 1980 team to Paris, France, as on the junior team, and then getting to race and really seeing literally thousands of people. There must have been 50, 60,000 people at that Longchamps stadium, It was a horse track that had the typical dirt track, but we raced on the outside where they would also have races on the grass, so the deep grass. And to see, literally thousands of people running around on this cross country, I went, wow, cross country and distance running and track and field is really a huge sport here in Europe. And I think that really kind of whet my appetite for what could be. And I had a good race that day and ended up getting the bronze medal. And our team ended up getting, I think our junior team ended up getting second. Um, Maybe the Russians beat us, or maybe it was the Spaniards, but we had a pretty good day. And remember after just thinking, yeah, this would be great. I want to get back over here. I'm going to run this World Cross as much as I can. Um, and you know the and so back then, following my mission, I took a 2-year time out and went to Spain on a mission, and then came back. And back then, now I feel like I have the luxury that I pretty much redshirt guys for a year once they get off their mission. But back then, the team numbers weren't what they needed to be, and I came back, and even though I hadn't run more than 3 or 4 times, I was still 140 pounds, didn't gain much, and was running again. And the great thing that my coach allowed me to do is he allowed me to run World Cross every year that I got back as well. So I think I was on the um, junior team my freshman year, but then I was on the senior team my sophomore, junior, senior years. And so that gave me some really, world class experience at a really young age. And fortunately, when I came through, I was able to continue running at a pretty high level until I was almost. I think my last Reebok contract went, and I think I would turn 40 that year, or maybe 39. So I had really been able to kind of run as a professional athlete in some of the early years for up until I was nearly 40. And the thing that happens when you do that is it kind of I'm sure I could have gone out into the public sector at that time and just started a whole new career doing whatever. Uh, and my degree was undergraduate was secondary education, and my graduate degree was exercise science. So I could have gone something in that range as well. Um, but an obvious thing would be, okay, how can I parlay the last 15 years of competitive running, 15 plus, 20 years really, into something that I could go forward and take into account maybe some of the things that I picked up over the time. And broadcasting was one area I was kind of interested in. I did some writing for Runner's World magazine for about 10 years or 11 years. But really, coaching was the thing that I thought that I had such great respect for my high school coach, such great respect for my college coaches. And even though I kind of coached myself um, as a professional athlete, it was more out of circumstances and not being centrally located where there was a coach that I could work with. So, um, it became kind of an obvious area. And the thing that really opened the door for me was I was living up in northern Utah, closer to where I grew up, and I had been recruited by Weber State, who at the time there was a man named Chick Hislop, who passed away a couple of years ago, but he did a very, very good job, excellent job, and was always very relevant in the Big Sky, and was always capable of getting guys to the NCAA meet. My senior year, one of the kids who he had coached, actually my junior year, one of his athletes was a guy by the name of Farley Gerber, who ended up winning NCAAs, and that for Weber State in the steeplechase. And that was right before I stepped on the track to run the 10,000, which I also won. And so we had 2 kids from Utah, the Utah high schools, who had come out within a year of each other, each winning state, or each winning the national championship in distance events. That at the time there were very, very competitive Kenyans there. It's like today. Today's getting a little more perfused even than back then. And so we had a couple of kids from about 30 miles away from each other, high schools, one from Weber State, one from BYU, winning national championships in the steeplechase and in the 10K. And And so that was a very, you know, big deal. But to answer your question, um, I had made the Chick Hislop offered me the opportunity as a 39-year-old or 38-year-old, um, to help out. I still had a couple of years left on my contract with Reebok, and he said, "Hey, you're up here. You can be one of my assistant coaches. It doesn't pay. It's a volunteer position, and you'll work close to 40 hours a week. But if you want to get into coaching, it's kind of it'd be a good step." And so I was able to be an assistant for Chick Hislop for 2.5 years in the Big Sky, and be able to ride the vans and buses around to all the Bozeman and Missoula and all the Pocatello and all the great places here in the Intermountain West, and was able to learn from Coach Hislop and learn his philosophy and stuff. And we had different styles certainly, and he didn't do things exactly the way that I had done it as a professional athlete, but I admired many of his qualities, and particularly his ability to coach the steeplechase. He had found and learned that he could take a good state level athlete from the high school levels, because he wasn't getting a lot of blue chippers, nationally going to Weber State, but he found that he could take a very good high school level kid and work with him, have them teach them proper technique in the steeplechase. And because the pool is going to be smaller in the steeplechase, because not everybody wants to run that event, um, that he could be very successful. And he had a lot of all-American athletes. And when he got to nationals, if he was going to score a point or some points or have a chance to win like Farley did, it was going to be in the steeplechase. And so it was great for me and great for my career to be able to follow him and kind of learn what he did to teach the guys the steeple. And since then, I've had more national champions at BYU in the steeplechase than I've had in the open events, and I attribute that much of that to the what I learned from Coach Hislop.
I mentioned earlier on the minor in Spanish, and there was a brief period in your history where I believe you moved to Mexico to train there. And I know you learned a lot about coaching the marathon while living in Mexico. Take me
Yep.
through that time period. What was the decision to move to Mexico? What'd you learn there?
Yeah. Well, I had made Olympic teams in '88. And in '88, I was more known as probably a road racer and a cross country runner and even a 10,000-meter runner. I was relatively unknown. I mean, the Olympic trials really was my second marathon, so um, so I was a rookie at it, but had a good day and made the team, finished second, and to Mark Conover and I, kind of broke away and ran together at the end, and then I got started cramping in my hamstring late, and I was going, oh man, I hope I can just hold on, and Mark. Uh, Finished in very strong fashion and won. He passed away recently, and but he was such a positive coach and positive athlete, positive friend, and positive coach at Cal Poly for many years. And then '92. By then I was more of an established marathoner. I was probably considered one of the guys who should factor in, and um, Steve Spence and I ended up, and Bob Kempinen went 1, 2, 3 that day at those trials. So that was great. But by '96, I was, turning. I think I turned 35 that year. So I realized that there wasn't, I wanted to try something, try to shake my training up a little bit. And I think sometimes we hit plateaus, and particularly as we age, we want to find something, tap into something new, maybe, or try to tweak things a little bit. So as a result of that, going into the Olympic trials in 1996, I had made friends with a guy named Herman Silva, who really was Mexico's top marathoner at the time. And Mexico, actually, at the time, if you look back, they had a whole group of guys, 3, 4, 5 guys who were very relevant on the world scene. There was Herman Silva, and and he had a training companion. They went 1, 2 at the New York City Marathon. Herman, I think, won it twice. And these were guys that I was running against week in, week out, because they would also run the roads, the shorter distances as well. So and speaking, speaking Spanish, having lived in Spain for 2 years and getting my minor in Spanish, it was not difficult for me to carry on good conversations with these guys. And I actually looked at a couple things because the Japanese were very successful in the marathon as well. They didn't have the masses that were doing so well like they are now, but they had individuals and groups that I was going, this would be cool to go over to Japan, but the language barrier I felt like was just going to be too insurmountable. And so I reached out to Herman and told him that I'd love to come down and just train with those guys and see. And he had and ask him if he had um, any apartments or a place where I could live down in Toluca, Mexico, just outside of Mexico City, where they were living. He said, "Yeah, come on down." He said, "I got an extra place at my condo. You can just stay with us for a time, see if you like it, whatever." So I went down there in would have been the winter of 1995, because the trials were going to be in 1996 in that springtime or late winter, early spring. And so I went down to Mexico and spent about 4 or 5 weeks there for one stint, and then went down for another couple months. And just really loved it. It was awesome. It was cheap because you were down in Mexico, so your money went pretty far relative to the pesos and whatever. But I just kind of immersed myself in with that Mexican training group, and Rodolfo Gomez was their coach, or at least their advisor. Herman wasn't working as closely with him as he had previously, but I learned a lot of at least the Mexican system at the time, what they were doing. They were working really hard Monday, Wednesday, Friday, long run on Saturday, take Sunday really easy. They were doing, 15 by a K with 60 seconds rest. They were doing 25 by 400. They were doing extended tempo runs of, 8, 9, 10 miles. They were doing repeat 3Ks, 5 by 3K, short rest. All of these things are still workouts that I will employ every now and then. So it was really fun for me to kind of immerse myself in that. And I got really fit. I thought I was going to go and just shred the 1996 trials. And to tell you the truth, I think I just overcooked myself, because I came back and I was like flat as a pancake and just had overdone it. So, but I don't have any doubt that there were some great things that came from the system. There was a Japanese runner who was down there training with us, who we would just rock in workouts, and was nowhere even close to us. Kanjiro was his name, and he was hilarious. And I think within that same time window, he would, he just couldn't do anything anywhere close to what we were doing. And then I think he ended up running. I think at the time it was the Japanese record, or it was one of the. He ran, I believe, 207 something. And we were all just in shock and awe and going, well, if he can do that, then we can run, 227, 26, which would have been probably the world record at the time. But anyway, it was a great learning experience for me. I think it was a necessary step for me. Looking back on it, I didn't know that I'd end up coaching marathoners necessarily. I was just more concerned about this one marathoner that I was coaching, and so I felt like it was a great kind of learning experience down there. A training buddy of mine, Paul Pilkington, came down for that second stint, and we had great workouts down there. And Paul came back, and he was fried too. So neither of us ran that great at the trials, but I think we both learned a lot that benefited us in our coaching professions.
Whether in Mexico or in the US, right? When I talk to athletes on the podcast today in these conversations, and it's very well known, you can only train so much as a runner. You can only even recover so much as a runner. And there's many, many other hours of the day that you're doing stuff. Present day, you get the whole 9 yards of responses that generally include something with your phone. What was Coach Eyestone doing back in the day when he wasn't running?
Well, Lynn and I were kind of building our family, and I was in a good enough position where I had a nice contract with Reebok, and I was not one to shy away from races. I raced a couple times a month, usually not necessarily year round, but close to that. And I'd have a couple marathons, one in the spring, one in the fall, and then be running on the roads. And I still I even ran World Cross up until I probably should have stopped running it. I think I ran it 8 times, and that was back when it was run every year. And I probably could have run it a couple more times, but finally I realized, maybe I should focus more on the marathon in the spring of the year, and not do the trials and whatnot. So I was busy with that, but it allowed me to be kind of a stay at home dad, along with my wife, who was also a stay at home mom. And she has her PhD in clinical psychology. She did a little counseling on the side, but by and large, we were able to raise our kids and spend some good quality time with them during their maybe even more formative years, as they were just little kids, and being able to take the carpool to school and do all those cool things that once I became a coach, where life gets suddenly I was a absent father was when I got the coaching gig. But as an athlete, it was really good. I mean, I was gone on the occasional weekend, but that was usually just Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or maybe even Friday, Saturday, Sunday. But then I was back as a coach. I'm traveling a lot more than that, if you take into all things. But unfortunately, at this point in time, I'm an empty nester. And I've got a very strong, supportive, independent wife as well, and that's also probably pretty necessary if you're going to coach at the college level. But yeah, that's I enjoyed raising my kids. I enjoyed, I probably spent more time playing the guitar than I do now, for sure. And just doing things like that in the community and with the local church and whatnot. But mostly my 9 to 5 job was being an athlete. So I was making sure I was getting enough sleep at night. I was doing the good old afternoon nap most of the time. And I'd train really hard in the morning, train really hard in the afternoon, take a little nap in the afternoon between my two workouts, and living the dream, and being a running bum, I sometimes called it. But it was good, and it was a fun career.
As those know listening, as well as you probably know better than most, as a really, really successful coach, so much of running is mental, and a lot of it's psychology. You mentioned a minute ago your wife's background in clinical psychology. What were the conversations like back in the day, if any, of your own psychology as an athlete, and present day, or over your years as the coach of BYU since 2013, when you come home for dinner and you have an athlete maybe struggling with something? Has that ever come up of, honey, what's your take on this? What's the clinical psychologist take on this situation?
Yeah, I mean, she's an awesome sounding board, certainly. And sometimes we'll go over some of our head cases, and every coach has a head case or two. And I don't say that even derogatively. You just some people, just have a hard time performing when it counts, and you're wondering, okay, what could I do to maybe take the pressure off, or do things differently. The nice thing about working for a university like BYU is we have some great sports psychologists also that we have access to. And so I often will defer to the professionals that we have to work with. We have some gentlemen who have given us, Dr. Manning and Dr. Lowell currently, who we will meet with us every couple weeks and just make sure that we're not putting too much pressure on ourselves, and that we're just enjoying the process. So much of it is reminding the athletes just to embrace, in those occasions when you are on a very good team and you have opportunities and you're feeling a little pressure. That's fine. Embrace that pressure and thrive off of it. And as long as you are enjoying the process and experiencing the process, then generally things work out. And by enjoying the process and experiencing the process, it just means you don't get too far ahead of yourself. Be present in the things that you're doing, and do the same things in races that you've rehearsed in practices. Be consistent in your temperament. All of those things, I think, end up leading to success. And I think that's consistency. You've heard probably me talk about this in the past and on other podcasts, or that's the magic bullet right there. It's not the 12 by K with 60 seconds recovery, or the 5 by a mile with 1-to-1 recovery. It's just being consistent in whatever um, in whatever program that you're in, and making sure that you're getting the work in, day out, week in, week out, month in, month out. And part of that consistency is staying healthy, and not doing too much. And if you can be consistent in whatever program that you're in, then ultimately you're going to have a chance to reach your ultimate potential.
As you say, C squared equals E squared. Consistent competence equals eventual excellence. Starting to wrap up this conversation, speaking on the BYU years some more. So you went to BYU and then you returned in 2000 as an assistant coach, as you documented, and then you took over as head coach in 2013. We're now in 2025, the new year, 12 years, 12 years of wild success. Congrats on all of it. I'm curious to hear about, and now, of course, sure, many people are familiar with your success on the pro stage, people like Kenneth and Connor and Clayton and the whole 9 yards, all of them. When you think ahead to the future, right? If you retired today, you'd be considered one of the most successful coaches in the NCAA and as a professional with the three I just named. Do you see yourself ever at a different school? Like what's the ratting into the sunset Coach Eyestone perfect vision, or is it just one day at a time? Let's see where this takes us. What's your vision for the future?
Yeah, well, it's been a fun ride, and and actually the head status in 2000, when I was hired, I was given the opportunity to be the head cross country coach, and then 2013 is when they combined the programs, men and women's, and I was made the director over both. So it's really been on the cross country side of 25 years that I've been doing this, and we've only won the national championship twice. So I don't know that I'm even in the conversation for legendary status.
Hey, I can make my case. I'll make my case.
But no, and you should never correct someone when they use hyperbole to describe what you've done. So thank you for that. But I do feel like I've been able to make an impact where you stand, and a lot of that is just surrounding yourself with greatness. I've had great people, great assistants that have been here along the way, but there has been more recent success over the last decade probably than the first 14, 15 years, but there was kind of a building process, and I think it came together. In terms of, I think people pretty much know that I was an athlete at BYU. I grew up in Utah. This is kind of the place I've put my roots down. I have family and daughters. Actually, I've got a couple daughters down in Arizona now, but I don't see any openings for jobs there right now, and I'm not looking for any right now. They're down at the U of A, and we'll take our track team down there, and I'll have a chance to spend some time with them. But yeah, I mean, and at this point in my career, I'm in my early 60s. I see coaches doing this until they're 70. I don't really see myself doing that necessarily, but we're coming off, my daughters kind of embraced Jonathan Galt. I think wrote a piece in Let's Run saying 2024 was the year of Ed Eyestone. That was very complimentary. It wasn't all roses, but we had a really good Olympics, and then we followed that up with a pretty good NCAA championship, and so all of those things were good. As such, it's you start kind of thinking, somebody actually asked, so, well, are you going to go out while you're on top? And I said, no, you don't do that, especially when you're still under retirement age. I guess you could. And I think financially we're probably in a place where that could happen. But I do feel like, I'm starting to see the end of things. And for me, I kind of look at things in Olympic cycles. I think, going through the next Olympic cycle, I see myself wanting to contribute here at the university and with my pro group. I won't make any, we're at that point where we're starting to recruit people. And I think people are going, well, how, are you going to be here for my career or not? And it's like, well, I am going to be, if I have in my say, I think I'd be here through the next Olympic cycle. And then from then on, we'll see how things are going. I've got good health and, haven't had my knees or hips replaced yet. And I don't
Still
think
running?
one, yeah, I'm still running. Yeah, I got my 5 miles in this morning. It's very slow. And one thing
Wow.
you learn when you get to a certain point is you no longer put a stopwatch on your runs. You just go out and get it done. Um, and I think we could all benefit from that. But yeah, I'm gonna keep at it for at least through. Well, I guess that puts it at 2028, right? When the next Olympic cycle goes, and then we'll take it a year from there at the time. But for the immediate future and even beyond that, I can see myself continuing to work with my pro group as long as I still feel like I have the juice and the health, and as long as my athletes want me to continue in that role.
You mentioned the 5 miles this morning. Immediately, I thought of, high school Ed probably wearing shoes that felt like concrete because there was no cushion. Have you ever tried something like the Alpha Fly threes? And if so, what's your, do you feel like you're going to
Well,
fly?
I'll certainly be someone to say that I would have run faster in
Yeah.
those shoes. And even though I still have the school record at 27:41, back when breaking 28 minutes was considered fast, um, Mance came within a second of that twice in his college career, and he's since run faster than that. I think Casey Klinger is going to bury that record here later this spring. So I'm kind of enjoying my time at the top. And of course, when he does take that down, then I will say I wasn't wearing your Dragonflies. I was wearing a little tiny. At the time, it was a Nike shoe because I was running at BYU and we were in Nike school at the time. But it was, yeah, it did not have any pogo sticks on the bottom of it. So you may get my time, but it would have been fun to race back in the day in some of those shoes because I think I could have taken at least a few seconds off that. And by a few, I mean probably
Multiple.
maybe 20, 30 seconds off of it. Um, but yeah, I've yet to run in a super shoe. I haven't even put them on my feet yet, but at some point in time, I'm sure I will. And but when you're no longer have a stopwatch in your hand or looking at your watch on your runs, then it doesn't really matter if you're wearing a super shoe or not.
We talked about your future. One question I want to ask you as we wrap up here: how would you personally define legacy, the word legacy, and what's the legacy you want to leave behind when you ultimately do leave the sport?
Well, it's kind of ironic because I remember having the same conversation when I was still an active runner back in the 90s, in even late 90s. I just wanted to be considered, and I think the followers of the sport at the time knew, and the word that I use now for coaching greatness or team greatness or individual greatness is consistency. And I always felt like I wanted, as an athlete, to be someone who was considered consistent, who they knew if I was going to be running world cross with the U.S. team, they knew I was going to be, you know, I mean, with Porter on the team, it was hard to be the number one man, but they knew that I was probably going to be, in top two, three, at the very worst, maybe fourth man. And I think I was always at least, other than maybe my first time running for the senior team, I think I was always usually in the top four. I always scored for the team. And I took some pride in consistency, running the championships, but also when I had the opportunities to, just running on the roads or whatever, they knew that, I remember one person saying, "You're America's hope." And I was going, okay, that's great. I'm glad you think that. But, but just knew that they were going to get a good race out of Eyestone. Very rarely did I go belly up in a race. And there were probably a couple times I did, but most of the time, if I was there, I was going to be the guy with USA or the guy. Most of my races were wearing Reebok singlets that was going to be up there running with the Kenyans and that was going to be, relevant in the race. And And I think that same thing goes in terms of legacy or legends or whatever. In terms of coaching, you want to be consistent in your coaching, consistent in your temperament, consistent with consistently producing athletes that are going to be relevant, making it to the NCAA meet. I take pride in the fact that we've, since 2000, we've had a team at the NCAA championships every year. We haven't always been at the top of the podium, but we've been there, and would like to continue that. And I think that speaks a lot, because it means that you're doing some things right, because your talent level is going to fluctuate year to year, but as long as your coaching is consistent, and your motivation is consistent, and your psychology is consistent, then you're going to get some solid, consistent performances. And that's what I would hope for, and I hope that would be part of my legacy.
I love it. Coach, final serious question for you. In a word, for those who have listened to this conversation, I always like to leave the listener with something actionable that they can take away. They see you, they see your success individually, but specifically now as a coach at BYU, reigning cross-country national champion, and they want to put some of that into their 2025, make this year their year of breakthrough for running. What's the word or one piece of advice you have for them to take their running to the next level?
Okay, well, I think we've been talking about it the entire time, right? It'd be I wouldn't be consistent if I didn't say consistency. Be consistent, folks, and whatever your New Year's resolution is, work on that consistently. And as you do that, you don't have to hit home runs. You just have to get some, going back to the old baseball thing that we started with, just get some wood on the ball, and do it consistently. The guys that get hits once out of every 3 times, they're in the Hall of Fame. So be consistent as well as you can, keep things together as well as you can, and try the best you can. And if you couple being competent consistently, as you mentioned, my old cheesy formulas is C squared equals E squared, which is consistent competence equals eventual excellence. And so just be good consistently, and you're going to go very far.
It's better to be consistently good than occasionally great, is one of my favorite ways of putting it.
Okay. Yeah, I like that too.
Yeah. Coach, final question for you. The question I ask every guest on every single podcast. If you had Gordon Ramsay coming over to your house for dinner, what would you choose to make for him?
What would I choose to make?
Yeah,
I would be smarter than that. I would have my wife make some of her excellent lasagna. I had it last night. In fact, I brought a piece today. I'm going to stick in the microwave. She's not Italian, but she makes a really, really good lasagna.
Coach, not much else to say. Then thank you so much for blessing me with 60 minutes of stories, wisdom, inspiration. I know a lot of people are going to be impacted by this one. This is a conversation I've wanted to have for much longer than I could even possibly tell you. So appreciate you for taking the time to share so much wisdom, and congrats on all of your success up until this point, and really excited to see all the things you accomplish in the years to come. Keep up the great work.
Thank you, Dominic. Go Cougars. And I'm going to go have a piece of lasagna. So take care.